Hello and welcome back to another Dare to Game video. Today we're playing Star Wars Jedi Survivor, and we're going to be going over the single saber stance. So this is kind of my attempt at a guide for the single saber stance as your primary stance. So if you've played the game at all, you know that throughout the story you will learn different stances to use. Basically different ways to use a lightsaber or two lightsabers or whatever the case may be. And each one of them has its own pros and cons, and you can equip two of these that you can quickly switch back and forth between. So today I'm going to be starting with the most basic one and the one that I actually personally use the most, the single saber stance. And so one thing to note about this one, it's quite simple. Obviously, the name would tell you, it's just a guy using a single-bladed lightsaber, basically like the vast majority of Jedi and Sith that we've ever seen in Star Wars. So this one is actually the first stance that you get, I should say, but really you just start out with it. And if I were to describe it, I would say it's a jack of all trades and a master of none. There are no real major weak areas for the single-bladed stance. There just aren't really any areas where it is the absolute best. Because of that, in my opinion, it just makes for the most engaging gameplay because it makes you feel more like a Jedi. You don't have any huge major weaknesses with this stance. I guess it would be more like a Jedi if it also it was just excellent at everything, had no weaknesses, and was really good at everything. Because the game does a bad job of making you feel like a powerful Jedi. That's my only real major complaint with this game. But anyway, that being said, the single-bladed stance, I believe, follows the pure Jedi playthrough the best, because it's a jack of all trades and a master of none. I would say that using this one, style-wise, it's the most aerial stance because just the way that it levels up and the way that it moves and the skills that you can upgrade for it, it makes it so you do a lot of jumping in combat, both because the jumping attack is something that is decent to use with this one and can deal a lot of damage, and B, just because I find myself jumping around a lot to avoid enemies instead of trying to parry them, because although you can, if you practice it enough, it is pretty easy to parry with this stance, as it is with any stance. I find it quite a bit more effective just to jump to dodge and get away from it, no matter what the situation is. There's very few times where the jump doesn't work the best with this stance. So yes, I call this one the most aerial stance, the most acrobatic. The animations used for this stance are primarily based on Jedi like Anakin and Obi-Wan, both from the TV shows like the Clone Wars and the different movies. So out of all the lightsaber stances, this one is going to appear the most similar to what we typically think of as a Jedi style of combat. So if you're going for that feel, then this one it's another reason why this stance is probably going to be your favorite. And finally, I will say, just as far as strengths go for this one, it's probably the best stance for beginners, not only to the game, but just to the Souls-like or Souls-light, as I would describe this game, genre in general, just because it's kind of the sword and shield variant, I would say, if I was comparing it to a Dark Souls game. That's sort of what the single-bladed lightsaber is. So it's because of the fact that it's a jack of all trades and a master of none, it's pretty easy to get effective with it. It's pretty easy to learn with it. It deals medium damage, but also is on the higher end of medium as far as speed goes. So it's probably the most forgiving combat form out of all of the lightsaber stances in the game. So I would say if you're a beginner to the genre or the game or both, then I definitely recommend figuring this one out before you test anything else, because it is very good for beginners. So just going through the different abilities related to the single-bladed stance, we have, of course, the basic attack, which is where you just, if you're using a controller, it's X. Otherwise, like, you'll be clicking with your mouse button or whatever. It'll be your basic attack. And if you do, the combo is basically 3 times, which you've seen me do a couple times, and I'll demonstrate again. But it'll be 3 wide sweeping attacks in front of you. To block with the single-bladed stance, you just hold the left bumper. That's pretty simple and straightforward. It's going to be similar to everything. The cleaving swing, or the strong attack, is just going to be when you hit Y, it'll give you this big not really overhead, but kind of a swinging around circular strike that deals more damage and takes away a lot more stamina than the regular one. The stun meter with this one, basically you're just getting their stamina all the way down, and once you get it down to nothing, if you continue either with X or Y attacks, it will engage in a finisher animation. You can throw your lightsaber by holding, it says tap LB and Y to throw, but I hold LB and then tap Y to throw it, but basically it gives you this medium-ranged attack where you throw your lightsaber that's pretty effective. The charged throw is a skill that you'll upgrade, and I'll go through the skill tree with you to show you all of these and kind of where you can get them, but basically it just makes it go a little bit further and do a lot more damage, plus it will actually go through different targets, so if you've got multiple targets lined up and you do the charged throw, it can damage more than just one. The lunging strike is your force attack. This is the one where if you hold Y, it will perform this one with the single-bladed one. It's nice for closing the gap between you and an enemy, and it's a very powerful attack that deals a ton of damage. I have the Cyclone Slash, which again, this is a skill that we can acquire for this one. It's just holding X after a basic attack, which will give you this over-the-top, powerful kind of jumping attack. The Aerial Assault is one of the reasons why I find this form to be very aerial, is because I use it a lot. It's just jumping and hitting Y. It gives you this big, powerful, smashing overhead cut. And then, of course, we have the dash that you can use on this one. So if you press B while mid-air, it gives you this cool force dash ability. So as far as skills for the single lightsaber whatever stance, it sounds so weird to say stance, so I keep stumbling over it. You can see that there are 9 different ones that you can unlock, and they are just going to improve a lot of your stuff. So the first one is lunging strike. Once you've gotten this, you unlock that force attack where you lunge forward, the one I showed you. Our next two are improved footwork, which gives you a longer reach on your lunging strike, and twofold reflection. So if you press left bumper just before contact to reflect up to 2 blaster bolts. So instead of just blocking the first one and shooting that one back at the person, you'll also block the second one that often comes and deals damage to you, so that's useful. We have the Aerial Assault then, up next in the middle section here. That's the one I showed where you jump up and you slam down with the big overhead chopping attack. Over to the right, we've got Cyclone Slash. That's the one where, like I said, you hold X after you do a basic attack, and it gives you that quick follow-up attack where you do quite a bit more damage. Charged Throw, it's just the improved version of throwing a lightsaber. Like I said, it goes a little bit further, goes through multiple targets, and deals a lot more damage. At Aerial Ace, that just upgrades our Aerial Assault attack, so that one just does more damage and also staggers enemies. The Dash Strike is the one where we hold left bumper and then press X, and we can, as it says, dash out and strike a target out of normal melee range. This is another one that's really good for closing the distance between you and your opponent. And then the Aerial Dash Strike, basically that just allows you to do it after you've jumped into the air, so not only can it really open up a lot of freedom with like enemies on different levels or like probe droids and stuff that might be flying, it also just really improves your versatility moving around while you're fighting with the single stance. So I don't really have any of those skills that I recommend not getting. I recommend if you're going to be using the single-bladed stance that you get all of them, because they really do make you a lot more effective. So that being said, you can have 2 stances at any given time, and like all things, there are certain ones that are certainly better to pair with it than other ones. And so my 2 favorite different stances to pair with the single-bladed stance, so if I'm using that as my primary, my 2 favorite secondaries are the blaster stance, which is just single-bladed plus you hold a blaster, and then the crossguard stance. So those are my 2 favorites, and the reason is because they're very complementary. So the reason I like the blaster stance, other than pure aesthetic, because it's very cool, is because one of the weaknesses of the single-bladed stance is that you do sometimes get into trouble if your enemies aren't close enough to you, because you don't move around as quickly as you do with, say, the dual wield or the double-sided lightsaber, so it is sometimes more challenging to close the distance between your enemies like this. And so the nice thing about the blaster stance is that it allows you to do some more of that attacks from a distance. And I find that just to be very, very versatile as far as using, you know, this form of lightsaber combat goes. The other stance that I like pairing with the single-bladed stance is the crossguard stance. And the reason for that is because, like I said, the single-bladed stance is a jack-of-all-trades, master of none. It does medium damage, is medium speed. So the one area where you'll sometimes find it being kind of annoying is fighting against bigger, more powerful bosses. And that's just because it doesn't swing as fast as dual-wielding or the double-sided one does, and it doesn't do as much damage as the crossguard one. So if you pair it with the crossguard stance, you can use it just specifically for the enemy types where you don't need to go very fast. So your, bosses, larger beasts, stuff like that, where it's more important that each strike you land does more damage than how many strikes you land. Because most often you're not actually going to complete a lot of combos when you're fighting the bigger beasts or the bosses. So it's better to have that single strike damage, and that's why I think the crossguard stance also pairs rather well with the single-bladed lightsaber stance. Lastly, for complementary perks, there's a lot of of different ways you can do it, but the 3 that I find to go best with it, well, it's 4 actually, but it'll depend on your secondary stance. So the 2 that I recommend no matter what are Fortitude, which gives you an increase to lightsaber damage, but incoming damage is also increased. The reason I like this one, and I like this one for a lot of different builds, is because the damage boost you get from for your lightsaber is a lot more noticeable than the increased damage that you take. So I've through using this one, I've realized it is a very noticeable increase to the damage that you deal, but it's not as big of an increase to the damage you take. So I think it's just especially for the aggressive player, it's definitely more of a boon than it could ever possibly be a downside. So Fortitude is the first perk that I definitely recommend going with if you're going to use the single-bladed stance as your primary stance. The second one is Equilibrium. So this one says using a force ability increases the damage of the next lightsaber attack. I find myself with the single-bladed stance using force as often as I can, and so Equilibrium is a good balance there, and I feel like, again, this plays into the Jedi playstyle because you're using both the Force and your lightsaber quite a bit through combat. You're not just using your lightsaber. And so, because of this skill, it makes your next lightsaber attack right afterwards deal significantly more damage. So that's why I definitely recommend Equilibrium. The last one is up for interpretation. I've got Versatility equipped because, so it says deal extra damage temporarily after switching lightsaber stances. The reason I have Versatility on is because I have this one equipped with the blaster stance, and when I do single-bladed and blaster, I find myself switching back and forth pretty frequently, and so I'm very, very frequently getting that damage boost because in combat I pretty much constantly switch back and forth between the two. And so if you want to pair the single-bladed stance with the blaster stance, I definitely recommend Versatility. If you want to pair the single-bladed stance with the crossguard stance, I actually recommend a different skill for this last slot, and that skill is Recuperation. And so this one increases your minimum force regen, so the minimum level that the force meter automatically regenerates is increased. The reason I recommend this one instead is because if you're not using the blaster, or at least when I'm not, I definitely switch less frequently. I only go to the crossguard stance for very specific enemies or very specific circumstances, and so it's just a lot more useful to have that force regen boosting up much more, so that way every time I get into combat, I'm going to have more force automatically available to me. It's one of the things that annoys me about this game. The force meter thing is kind of stupid. I kind of see maybe not wanting to make it too overpowered, but we would never really see Jedi needing to super limit the amount that they use the force in combat, and so I don't like the way that makes it feel. But anyway, Recuperation definitely helps with that to make it less of a problem. And so that's really all there is to say about the single-bladed stance. Like I said, it's probably the easiest to learn, most adaptable stance. I think it works the best if you're going for that pure Jedi build. I personally like the way it looks, like the way the animations are the best, so I find myself using it the most. But yeah, those are the perks and skills and all that sort of stuff to know about. That's all there is to know about the single-bladed stance, and so that's all for today. Hope you enjoyed the video and found it useful, but we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching another Dare to Game video. If you liked this video, please leave a like and a comment. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel. If you like my content and would like to support this channel, consider becoming a member today for as little as $1.99 a month. It makes a huge difference. But in any case, thanks for watching and have a nice day. I'll see you next time.